Hi, ladies and gentlemen. This is Court Brutnowski coming to you once again, Chairman of the Greater Education Council of Connecticut, and part of our ongoing series to inform and educate the public about what is going on in our educational system and on related subjects. So today we have Becky Hamman, who is a tigress, if there ever was one, on the Stamford Board of Education. And we've been chatting with her, and she has quite a story to tell. And so we're going to try and get through these things. As I can tell you, if anybody is foursquare in the middle of the fight, she is. Thank you, Becky.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, so tell me first, we'd like to start out, where you were born, what your childhood was like, and, eventually how you got your way here.
Sure. Well, so I am originally from the west area of the United States, Montana, and the land, with the big sky. I grew up there and went through college, also had the opportunity to travel internationally with people, which was quite the experience.
Wow.
So I stayed in over 80 host family homes internationally. So that was quite the experience and really opened my eyes to what the world was like outside of Montana. Mm-hmm. That was when I even got my first plane ride at that time. It was really kind of cool. But anyways, so traveled through the education system, started out in a country school, and graduated Montana State, and then moved to Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And was a teacher in Greenwich for 10 years, mm-hmm. and then I became an administrator. And I've had wonderful experience to be trained in some great programs with some great leaders. Mm-hmm. So I then at that point have a master's in gifted ed and have done a lot of work at UConn. I have a master's in administration and supervision from Fordham, and then I have a doctorate from Columbia. Mm-hmm. So it's really prepared me well for the Board of Ed, surprisingly, and mm-hmm. At this point, never in my life that I'd be serving in a public office, and it's quite an eye-opener. And mm-hmm. for me, being in the classroom as long as I have, almost 30 years, it's quite an eye-opener to understand how policy is the root of many things, mm-hmm. and to see how politics now has intervened and has brought in a whole nother type of thinking into the education world, which probably started way back in the 60s. Mm-hmm. It's frightening for me as a person and as an educator, because we're, I think, really doing a lot of damage to the youth.
Have you read Mark Levin's book, American Marxist?
No, but I have it on my bookshelf. It's one more book.
You just got to go straight to chapter 4.
Okay.
Okay, because that is it's obvious that Mark Levin put a lot of work into this thing. I mean, he really researched it. He did his homework. And chapter 4 is just a beautiful summary of how Marxist thinking infiltrated American education. Marcuse, Eros and Civilization, One-Dimensional Man, right? And Paulo, Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I don't know if you ever read that book. Yeah, well, these are the standard tomes, if you will, for liberally educated teachers and administrators who've been through the system. So he shows that there's a very clear lineage, if you will. And now, just for the audience, my background was in psychology and biology, dating back to the 70s when I went to SUNY Purchase. And it was so eerie for me because as I'm reading that chapter, he's citing the books that I read when I went to college.
Right.
And I was going, wow. So I was getting Marxist indoctrinated, and I didn't even realize it. How did that work out, guys? Not well. So there's I'm just bringing that up as a point of reference, and for you and for others, it'll tie a lot of things together. And then he has, calls to action at the end, and this is certainly a part of that in order to deal with all of that. So, so how long have you been on the board?
So this is 3.5 years.
3.5 years.
I came right on the board when COVID, we were excused, and schools were closed, and we went into the homes.
Right. So my perception of the last election was that conservatives made some gains. on some of the boards around the state. Would you agree with that? Or you're not sure?
Certainly, no. Stamford, I'm in Stamford, Connecticut. A lot of the boards around us are Republican towns as well as Republican boards.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. The other thing was, did you make any acquaintance with this person that Jackie Hamman mentioned, who's now on the Greenwich Board of Education? She referred to him as a true patriot. He's the one and only.
Oh, on the Greenwich Board of Ed, I haven't. Boards don't always communicate, unless we're in some type of
environment,
committee work, state work. So I haven't had the privilege of meeting this person.
Right. Okay. Well, for the Greater Education Council, one of the projects that we still need to get to.
That's right.
Is to identify the like-minded people of boards around the state and let's get together. But these are all labor-intensive tasks. So yeah.
Right. And I think too the other issue. So just so you're aware, because Connecticut is built like it is with 95, sometimes that prevents us from always doing that. I think Zoom and, doing telecommunication has probably been a great saving grace, but we'll connect with them. I didn't realize that, so that's good.
It has its place, but there's nothing that replaces face-to-face meetings. The chemistry, the dynamics, the networking that happens, So what was the other thing? I wanted to jump to what you were saying earlier about the attempt of these people. Well, let's start with Jackie Hamman and how she's trying to censor you. Okay, I think that alone is a case study in what's wrong with what's going on in this state. So,
President Hamman is the president of the Board of Ed in Stamford. She has been on the boards for 15 years. She has a background. She's 80 years old, which is fantastic. I'm glad to see, that age is not an issue for her. But the unfortunate part, she does not have any undergirding as far as what I can see, any further work beyond a high school diploma. So I think some of what happens with her, she locks onto policy thinking that it's the law. And unfortunately, some of the law gets misinterpreted. And the reason I bring this up is because Tuesday night, our board had a retreat. And one of the last questions was about censoring one of the members. That happens to be me, because I like to write op-eds. And because part of my background, because I've been so immersed in education, it's my passion. I understand what's happening. The leaders in the Board of Ed leaders have basically controlled that district for at least 10 years. And they do it through simple votes. It's always a 6-3 or it'll be a 7-2 vote, usually. And she thinks that once policy is in place, that she can censor any of the decisions made, the votes made. So if a vote goes down, for example, DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, for some of you who don't understand that, know what that acronym means.
Or dumb, evil idiots for some others.
So she has used that, and I was the only one who voted against it. And because I dared to press in, and now the policy is 2 years old, and they have done no monitoring, and teachers are beginning to press back saying, we're implementing the regulations of the policy. We're concerned because national research too is very strong about saying it's falling on its face. It is not doing what it's supposed to do. The students it's supposed to help, it's not helping. So,
I'm sorry, what is the policy again?
In Stamford, it's the 5,000.1, and it's called equity and diversity.
Okay.
So that policy in itself, I was the one out of 8 who did not pass, vote for it.
So you're telling me it's not working?
No, it's not working.
Well,
okay.
We're glad.
At this point, because I've done research, they have no research to back that up.
Yeah.
They just have their momentum and what they're operating with from the federal level and the state level, but there is no data behind this. But there is data that's happening nationally, that they should be looking at. And I dared bring that forward as policy chair. She's taken me out of that too.
So is being shocked my correct reaction to this? Yes?
It's very healthy. I'm glad. I mean, you understand what's happening. And so the next step was that I write about this.
Yeah.
And they don't like what I write because I try to tell the truth from policy perspective.
Right.
She does not like that. And so now, because they want to censor me.
Well, let me qualify this. This is her policy, right? She led it. She engineered it. She pushed it through.
They
Okay.
wanted it pressed
And it's
hard.
her policy, okay? And it's not working. So she doesn't like the bad news.
Well, it's not working because I had to tell them there is no data that you're pulling forward in the district. Where is your rubric? So when I pressed it in November through the policy committee, I wanted to have a simple discussion on the definition of educational equity and pressed it. All I got back was a lot of drama and a lot of yelling that you didn't vote for this, so you don't support it. And it's like, I just want to give you a framework and what's happening. So there is national data out there now showing.
This is part of another thing about the Stamford board. All right, sidebar, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to enjoy this.
Okay.
The story about Charlie Pia trying to crawl out of the room in one of the meetings. Yes, no?
And I don't know if I know that gentleman.
Okay, he used to be. All right, so the name Pia is an old Republican name.
And it's a very Stanford name. I know that.
I'm sorry, in Stanford, very Republican name. And so Charlie Pia was a guy, I think it was a Charlie, I hope we got him right. Tall, skinny guy. He almost ran for mayor once.
I don't think it's Charlie. I think it's another
Pia.
Yeah.
All right, but so.
Part of that big family.
All right, so Mr. Pia. So he was serving on the board. Now, on this particular night, I believe it was Jackie and another woman who is a titular Republican whose name escapes me right now. Jackie tried to not let the Republican woman have her chair.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, the sidebar to the sidebar, this woman who was locking horns with Jackie Heffman had a boyfriend. Her boyfriend is a professor of management at Iona College who specialized in the study of dysfunctional organizations. And yes, that was his case study.
Oh.
He was studying the Stanford Board of Education to show you when management cannot function properly.
And she probably should have 10 years ago when there was that whole sexual issue with a teacher and a student.
And the others,
she should have stepped down because everybody on the board, Republican and Democrat, resigned.
Yeah, no, there's the school superintendent, her name escapes me right now, but she landed in a job in the State Department of Education. Valentine was the principal at the school at Stanford High where this took place. And it was a classic example of the first people to know something's wrong are the students, and the last people to know are the administrators, and eventually the teachers find out. I mean, that was the dynamic in the high school. But
well, I think they knew.
Yeah.
It's just they had code words, and nobody wanted to address it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that was part of the problem.
Oh.
And in fact, we have one of those individuals who's still working in the district.
Okay. Well, that tells you all you need to know.
Well paid, too. I think it's almost a $300,000 salary.
Okay, so so you had this scene. It was embarrassing, right there at a public meeting, and Pia was trying to kind of get out of the room. Heffman catches him, yells at him to get back. It was bad.
Wow.
All right, so that's the people you work with, just saying.
Yeah. And I wasn't, at that point, very involved probably in school districts.
Yeah. Okay.
Never. I'm a resident of Stamford, and I volunteered to step forward and help them. And now I'm seeing the real story. And it's hard because when you're so immersed in what I do and the work, and then to see the games that are being played by bureaucrats, that's hard.
Right. So I know that's... My problem is, for example, I spent 4 years fighting Common Core, and I learned a few things from that. We're outnumbered. outfunded, outtrained, lack of experience, inability to work together, can't set up our own management structure to speak of, okay? So what do you think of the results going to be, right?
You're not, yeah, right.
Didn't get very far. So, and that well-trained beast is still there, okay?
23 years of it.
Yeah.
No
at least.
Child, Common Core, DEI.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it's a Republican and Democrat issue. They
Yeah.
both own it, you know.
Right.
And unfortunately, when you give up local control, as a student, I went through schools under local control.
Yeah.
Luckily, I was in Greenwich when we still had local control.
Yeah.
And we were one of the top states in the nation as far as what we were doing.
What do you mean by give up local control?
Well, when you bring in these federal policies
Oh, I see. In
from the
that
top
respect.
down. So No Child was under President Bush.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking of the creature of the state doctrine, because the board is a creature of the state,
Yeah.
and as such, it doesn't serve the interests of the local.
And
parents.
even our state constitution, I mean, if you
Mm-hmm.
look at it, has been, you know, tinkered with already because
Mm-hmm.
people were, you know, the bureaucrats and those who are Marxists behind the scenes knew how to tinker with it and already revise it. Because technically, we could fire that whole board
Mm-hmm.
if that state constitution hadn't been changed or had been written, because there's no local control anymore.
All right. Is there a history of this? I mean, if you were to write up, could you write up something about the tinkering that's been done?
You know, I'd have to, this is probably it's a whole nother piece of work, but it would
Yeah,
take some
it's-
time.
It's important to understand.
Because I was in the state in '86, so, you know, I would have thought maybe even when the initial constitution for the state was written, that it was written that way because
Mm-hmm.
other states are allowed to take out the boards,
No. Others,
not in Connecticut. So I
Although-
don't know if it was originally
Okay,
done.
but there is another, well, this will, later on, we'll get into this other approach. Back to the censorship. So at this point, they're threatening to censor you,
Right.
okay? And so how are you going to deal with it?
So luckily, we have a new board member coming on who has been appointed by the Board of Reps. He came on Tuesday night. He was sworn in. And he's a lawyer and a conservative lawyer who understands the Constitution, who understands the city charter. And he has been like a gift of grace to our board. They don't yet know the force that's behind him, but he is brilliant enough because I like to share my op-eds ahead of time, my drafts, and say, is this something, he heard the conversation about the censorship, and I whispered to him, it's about me. And he then has, you know, basically said, no, you are a elected public official, and you can say what you want. That you are under the, you know, amendment, and you can do that. So I think he is now going to probably go up against her because the issue is going to be once the new officers were elected in December, that they didn't put the policies that they all have to be under our jurisdiction. He said those are old policies technically until they're voted in as policy. So he said, no, let's get it published. He's a professor. So
Oh, yeah?
he
What does he
understands that his name's, I think it's law at Sacred Heart.
Okay.
I don't know him. I just met him Tuesday night.
Okay.
And other than, you know, just he's very knowledgeable and he's not afraid to go up against her. And I think that's what we need. I'm not versed enough in all the laws. And I think he feels that, you know, he knows the charter pretty well, the city charter too, which we fall under that jurisdiction, but he's able to say, did this happen yet? Did this happen yet? And I said, no, no, no. And so I think it'll be an interesting meeting, first meeting that we're going to have.
Okay, because I still have, again, like we were talking about with respect to the Guilford Board of Education, and I think the Greenwich Board of Education is guilty of this too. There is this tendency to not follow your own rules. It's systemic, endemic, institutional, I don't know what to call it, but it seems to show up a lot.
And President Hamman worships a lawyer that we bring into the district, Mr. Mooney, Tom Mooney, and he has a book, 10th edition.
Yes.
And this new gentleman that's coming on board, he said even she could not follow that book, which talks about policy. So it was pretty much case in point.
Right. Well, I think,
know?
you know what, this raises an interesting question. Now I'm going to get philosophical. Forgive me. The issue here is you've described Jackie Hamman as a person who has what we'll call a rigid mindset. Fair enough? Okay. So that's a bad prescription for being able to manage, to delegate, to set goals, to monitor your progress, to do all the things that are needed to say you're a good administrator.
She has no background in education.
All right.
And she's more of a manager than I would call a leader. And that's the problem. So in that 15-year period, they have brought on out-of-staters who are not versed in Connecticut, who are not versed in instructional leadership. And that's, as I do a lot of my opt-eds, I'm an instructional leader. I was taught well. I can do that in my classroom. I can do that in a building as a principal. But many of our leaders cannot do that, and they have not been in classrooms for years. And I'm keen to that. I see it and I smell
So
it.
isn't that an opening?
So I write about it.
Okay, isn't that an opening for you? I mean, to take some of these people aside and teach them in your ways?
Well, remember, I'm a board member. Board members can't do that unless I was...
Really? Why not? Is there a specific prohibition against it?
No, I just think, you know, you got to stay in your lane, and I don't think it's appropriate for me to step outside of my lane as an elected official.
Okay.
If I was working, you know, I am working as an assessor around the state, but I have been given that label.
All right.
I have the certifications,
Okay.
but not in a board, not a board of ed. That would be stepping out of my lane.
All right. Well, forgive me for getting creative here, but my first question is, what about an ally instead of you?
Right.
Okay. But then the second thing is, so there's another layer here that I was totally unaware of with respect to education. Okay, and it's this idea of instructional leadership. So in every school district, then there are, quote, instructional leaders.
There should be.
That's even better.
Yeah, there's not.
All right.
We have lost that.
What's that all about?
Well, it was a miracle that I ended up in Greenwich, Connecticut, and under the tutelage of phenomenal administrators. You do not see them anymore.
Yeah.
And this particular principal that I was with for 10 years, she had been a teacher for well over, I would say, 15, 20 years. So she understood what was happening. Also, on a state level, we had a phenomenal, I want to say, commissioner and instructional team behind the scene because we became nationally well respected as a state up until No Child went into place. Even, you know, No Child was, it knocked out what we were doing as far as work. And instructional leadership is we weren't playing school.
Okay.
We were able to take learning. It's almost like the Super Bowl. We were able to look at strategy and help every student, not the gifted kids, not, you know, the kids that struggled. We were to take every student and we were to move them from this scrimmage line to this scrimmage line. Yeah. And we knew how to do it as practitioners. And
so what happened? So I'm assuming there's a culture behind this to do this.
Yes.
And has that culture been destroyed?
Yes.
Can it be recreated?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think, again, it's having the right professors. It's having healthy discussions between universities and schools. But when policy comes into play and can play,
all kinds of games,
just mess it up.
Yeah.
And then you get people with certifications. I have every superintendent, I have every certification under the sun. I'm a teacher, I'm an administrator, I can be a superintendent. The problem is and then they can cross state lines. But if those teachers have not taught for a time period under the tutelage of healthy instructional leaders, they only know how to play the game. And they're simple managers. They're not leaders. They're not visionaries. And that's been the problem in Stamford for many years.
Okay. I see that as a vacuum that gets to be filled by you.
Yeah.
And others.
Well, then it's a political game. And because
Visionary ends up being a political game?
Absolutely. Because if I don't speak the right language that they want, if I'm not woke, I will probably not have a chance in the interview process.
Yeah.
Oops.
This is yeah. No,
It's
this
the
is,
truth.
Well, this is something for you and me to discuss later, because I admit I'm kind of big on these things. All right. So the thing with the with the censorship is that you've got now an ally on the board, and this will probably, to me, it sounds like it'll be rendered a non-issue in due time, and you'll continue to be able to speak for it.
Well, it'll be interesting because he did clarify. He said, were the previous policies voted in as the current policies that we are going to enact as a new board? And I said, no, but as soon as she gets keen to it, she will. So then at that point, probably they'll go to censor me because they don't like the past
but
work.
if a policy violates the Constitution of the United States, I'm thinking the Constitution wins. So if they're trying
No,
to...
not if they're constitutionalists, and many of them will no longer say that they, the Constitution is supposed to be changed
all right,
and
now,
revised.
I'm turning it into a
I
federal
know.
case. So, but...
Right, and
Well, anyway,
I think that's maybe where your work will happen as a
I have a feeling.
organization.
Me and
It's going to have to.
Jackie and Sally and others, yes. So, as well as the council. All right, so there's that part. What was the other thing I wanted to bring up? So to what extent would you say Common Core is still being done in the school system?
Oh, it's absolutely being
all right.
addressed. I mean, that's all they can go by at this point. They've taken away local control. That was the beauty of what Connecticut was doing. We didn't need a Common Core. We knew exactly the skills at each developmental level that we needed to address. We addressed those through the CAPT and the CMT very well. Now,
Yeah, okay.
could have, and that was the problem. So now you have a Common Core like as AP all the way down, advanced placement all the way down to kindergarten. So it is setting skills up in many ways if it's not done, if it's not dissected and implemented correctly. Teachers are going to be teaching, and that's what's happening with the Common Core and the complaint with the SBAC that's done at the state level
right.
and, of course, national level. It's created problems because you have students who really need that teaching that you can't do through a Common Core, my personal opinion.
Okay, so what are you calling teaching through a Common Core? I mean, how would that be?
Right, so they have standards that are built into the curriculums.
Right. Yes, so the Common Core standards, which are at the, quote, state level, and then they're supposed to trickle down.
And it's
district.
national, so they've made it national.
Yeah. But are you saying that how Common Core is practiced in Connecticut is the same as in California? And
It should be.
yeah, well, this is...
Right. Again, it becomes subjective when you look at different curriculums.
I mean, the original purpose of Common Core was to overcome this, quote, patchwork, right, of standards around the country. But guess what? Over time, it's going to drift back to individual state practices.
And then the issue is when you put DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion policy on top of that, and you're teaching sexism and racism, that becomes yet another agenda item beyond the Common Core. So I'm a certified skills teacher. I teach math and science. That's my certification. When I have to teach sexism and racism through math and science,
yeah, what are you talking about?
Right.
You've lost it. You've lost it.
We're losing what the
this is my
spirit of public ed was supposed to be about.
The spirit of education, period.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned.
Right.
I mean, just to throw it in there, to me, I mean, the Latin root of education is educare, and one interpretation is to bring from darkness to light, to bring out care, light. So that, to me, is what it's supposed to be. Also, just to make the point, when my kids went through the Greenwich system, at the middle school at least, they had what I thought was a great way of evaluating math skills, okay? So they would give you this report that broke out all the different facets of different math, arithmetic skills, if you will, from
Right.
understanding ratios to being able to do division to understanding exponents, etc. You'd be ranked and said, here are your areas of strength, here are your areas of weakness. I thought this is great. This is exactly what you need. But it disappeared, right?
Right. It's Right. Unfortunately, it's kind of like clothing styles or glass styles.
Well, this is what...
It's all about style, and it's
Yeah.
all about a new approach. And so...
And so there's a fundamental failing here then, as far as I'm concerned. If you cannot... All right, I'm sorry, folks. I'm invoking Winston Churchill. Forgive me. Okay, who said, man walks down a path, stumbles, falls over the truth, gets up, brushes himself off, and walks on as if nothing happened. I'd say that's a very good description. It fits education.
Well, and I think what's starting to happen, and I'm a tried and true public educator, so I thought, but now, like a state like Connecticut, you almost have to look at let the tuition follow the child, let what we pay out for each child, and open up the doors and allow, because when families are taken out of that picture too, and that is just, that's what was the backbone of my learning is the family.
Yes,
parents.
of course.
And I think at this point, we may need to go to school choice in Connecticut because...
and that and homeschooling.
And homeschooling, because we can then control some of that truth that's being put out there.
So here's one of the interesting things about homeschooling that I'm hearing about, this sort of, bits and pieces, anecdotes here and there. First of all, the background. TeachCT.org put up data on homeschooling. March of 2019, they said, well, it looks like there's around 22,000 kids who are homeschooling. Still a small part of the population. 2 years later, that to March of 2021, that grew to over 45,000, okay, in just 2 years. That is what they call dramatic growth. Now, I'm sure it's a lot bigger than 45,000.
Right.
Okay.
Because parents are taking control. They're not letting the government raise their children. They want to, and that's what needs to happen.
Right, but still not enough parents understand what they need to do.
Well, and many are trying to put food on the table.
As well, sure, all of that.
And that's...
And so point number 2 and then point number 3. Point number 2 is there are examples where there seems to be a remarkable level of cooperation between homeschoolers and the public school system. They allow the kids to be in their sports teams, they can join the clubs, they'll provide resources if the parents need them, so the parents are obviously, taking what they need and leaving the rest. So this becomes a very interesting situation because if you were to project out what these public school systems become, in effect they become resource centers, and it's weird how their central mission is then kind of farmed out. It's outsourced to other places. This is wild. Who would have ever thought of such a thing, right? So,
well, follow the money, right?
Oh, well, that's certainly part of it, yes, follow the money. So now the other part, I'm under the impression that to a certain extent, Stanford is more of a, I'm going to call it a educational tempest. Because you've got homeschooling groups, you've got these academies of all kinds, as well as public education. A friend of mine who started a new Catholic academy in Stamford, David Lancaster. And so if you look at all of that together, that's a very different look as far as education is concerned. It fills me with hope.
And those parents, again, it comes down to money. If they can afford some of those other options, they'll do that or work with their schedule in order to allow it to happen. But a lot of it's about educating our parents to understand, that there are options out there. They do not have to do what's coming through the public schools. And we're a city. So I think because we've depending upon how well they're advertising and networking, more parents are waking up. So that's a healthy story. Another
example, for 5 years I taught science after school at the Boys and Girls Club in Greenwich and a little bit in Stamford. And I had learned that at the Yearwood Center in Stamford, for a time, you had Hispanic parents who got together and formed their own weekend academy. So they'd all go there, the kids would take classes, they'd be hanging out, and that was, if you will, an antidote, as far as I'm concerned, to what was being taught in the school system.
Right,
So
you'll see a lot of these nonprofits too. There's peer tutoring programs happening. Russian school, German schools.
Yes, the Russian school.
Yeah.
Have you followed them at all?
Yes, because I've had some of my substitutes who teach in them,
Well, my
and they
kids
want
took
to
math
teach them in that
for a couple
language.
years. Didn't quite turn out as we expected, but that's another
I know.
story.
I think it's, we need to allow that to happen.
Of course.
And, we are a democracy, and I was having this conversation with someone and who was just adamant, no, that promotes white supremacy. And I said, excuse me? I just was in shock that no, we need to have every child, I said, indoctrinated with what you want them to be indoctrinated with. I said, that's not right.
Yeah.
We are a democracy, and that's where many people don't understand the power that we have with our Constitution.
All right, so I take that as another educational mission, where you have to tell basically everybody you can. Now, I will, as an example, I will confess this project. You'll actually find it on Yankee.T.News. It's a work in progress, like the whole website is a work in progress. It's not what it needs to be by far. But, so, it's education, not indoctrination, and my partner came up with incredible graphics for it. But what I started to do was write out a booklet that was targeted for teenagers to explain, okay, you're getting brainwashed. Let me explain how. Here's toxic masculinity. Here's white supremacy.
Right.
Here's white privilege. Here's all this crap, and let me explain to you why it's crap. Okay, and that would be a booklet to hand out to people. Now, in my passing it around to others, I said, well, you're kind of overshooting the mark, Court. This is more college level stuff, the way you're writing this. So I've been trying to figure out how to,
Right.
It's actually turning into a problem for me. I can't believe it.
Well, and I think a lot of it, because I'm out of state quite a bit because I'm parenting parents right now.
Right.
And I see some of the employees that they're bringing into, they're at a great place, great facility, care center. A lot of high school kids who are able to work in different, whether they're in the cafeteria, they're helping them nursing-wise.
Okay.
So it's a real great exploratory. But it was interesting how some of these kids I'm having conversations with and what's going on in a North Dakota school district versus what's going on in a Connecticut.
Interesting. Wow.
And so it really opened their eyes too. And I said, are you aware that the key here for your education is how to think, not what to think? And then they kind of went, I've never heard that before. And I said, unless they have teachers who are open to really
working on how you think.
Right, then, it creates, you can see where they're basically thinking they're empty heads and they need to be filled up with the knowledge that educator's giving them.
Well, it doesn't stop there, because, there's another argument over critical thinking. One of our members of the board, Ken, who's also a publisher, is a big fan of core knowledge and E.D. Hirsch. And he points out that you can't really think about a subject if you don't know much about it.
Right.
So, and I think that's a reasonable point. But that's
sure. Where instructional leader comes.
Right.
Good instructional leadership comes in, and those essential questions, and the principal or the department head helping teachers, move in that direction.
Okay, so is there a basis for, I'm going to back up just a little bit here. I believe we are still pretty much a scattered brotherhood and sisterhood. Some places we're coming together. I would say that our council is probably the first coming together, the first group that comes into the clearing. And the idea is to, build out and get other people involved. So the way we're set up right now is 80% of our efforts are focused on Guilford and 20% on building out into the state. And what I hope is that will flip over time. So, yes, there's a lot to be done. And when you talk about instructional leadership, the question comes into my mind then, are there people outside the system who can be brought together, who are dedicated to this issue of developing instructional leadership, even if they're not a part of the system?
Yeah, where you see a lot of that kind of thinking and approach is through Hillsdale College. I use them as a backbone.
Sure, right.
And I think that's where we need more of those colleges to take that and run with it.
Yep.
But you do not see that in a lot of colleges this day and age.
Yeah, so that said, so I'm going to say it. I mean, it's a big ask, but as I look at the things that we do and what you do and what others around the state like us are struggling to do, I'm sorry. We're the ones who are going to have to make the system anew, okay? Now, I can trust that it'll happen in a way that's kind of organic in an unexpected way by the example I gave about public schools supporting homeschooling. But yes, it will be something that is different and better than what's going on now.
Yeah, and it's where, I wrote it in my last op-ed, where is the breaking point? Where do families just have said, I've had enough, and they pursue learning about this? Kids not necessarily, because they're still kids, they're still students.
So this is one of the other things. Have you looked at Portrait of a Graduate?
Oh yeah, in many districts.
Okay.
It's very important.
Right, yeah. So I am hoping that you can disabuse me of a couple of concepts where I must be out of my mind. The first, there's two parts. And I've been listening to this video, I forgot her name, Deborah something or other. And so they had gotten a video this one session where they're talking about how they're developing Portrait of a Graduate. And they kept oohing and ahhing over student-led initiatives, okay, where the students are saying, this is what I want to learn. So I'm assuming that these nice-sounding phrases that are the guiding principles, you know, collaborator, communicator, resilient, critical thinker, and some of these ethical, you know, and that's interesting because not all the guidelines for all the school districts are the same. You do see these slight different. One will emphasize ethics, another actually emphasizes being knowledgeable, but you don't see knowledgeable expressed in any of the others. So there's clearly, again, some kind of local influence in terms of how they think about it. But I'm still, you know, confused because they have these high-sounding things, but I'm having trouble connecting it to how you teach history, how you teach science, how you teach music.
Right. A lot of that is coming through the accreditation programs. So in Connecticut, we use NEAS, New England Association of Schools and Colleges. You know, Westchester, New York side will use the, goodness, all of a sudden I just went blank. It's another accreditation program. So some of that is coming through that. And they allow the freedom to each district, each school within that district to have that freedom. Again, this is coming through the university systems. And depending upon, and of course, the curriculum, national curriculum councils. So you have English, you have social studies, you have science. And so that is being, who's ever on those boards, who's writing that curriculum.
As well.
That is the other piece.
All right, so there's a college board and the funny things they've done to advance placement. Then there's the National Association of Scholars who stand in contrast to them.
Don't forget International Baccalaureate. That's a huge
Oh, yes,
thing.
another one. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And
remember, that's a European model. That's not American.
Well, my understanding is it originated in the United Nations, and it was Marxism inspired.
Oh.
Okay, that's my understanding of the International Baccalaureate. But the other thing about IB that's strange to me is that for admission purposes, how long SAT scores last, if you go through an IB program, and they will accept a lower SAT score for IB graduates than for others for acceptance.
Well, when you hear kids coming back from college, they actually prefer, they say, I was better prepped through IB than advanced placement.
In what way?
Because of the nature of how they teach the kids to think. Because they start with a philosophy course that kind of that foundations the whole program. And then when their work is done, it is sent to an international, whoever's going to grade that. So if you're in history...
Aren't they in Switzerland, IB program?
You know, and see, I just don't know enough about where the training's done, but I think, yes, they train, I think there's a place in Texas, too, that many go to train, but it came, I think, Switzerland. And then what happens, you know, once those papers are corrected by a teacher in Africa, depending upon who's given that responsibility, so they're getting information, you know, it's international.
Okay, truly.
And so... but I think you'd have to look at the framework of the program and how it's built.
Okay, but when you're doing something like that, then the international perspective, then hopefully you'll be a little bit stronger on history. And when you get around to government, you'll have an interesting approach, even if it's not as American-centered as you'd like it to be. But for that, in my mind, other things suffer. I mean, you're not going to teach math as well because your time is taken up with these other subject areas if you're trying to be international.
And I'm probably not the best person to talk with because I don't have that background.
Yeah.
But these are all, as you're talking, the source and the foundation of how that learning is taught. I think these are good questions.
Yeah. So you know the IB school in Greenwich, right? You've been in there.
Dundee, yeah.
And don't they have flags of the world everywhere?
I've not actually been in the school, but I've seen other international baccalaureate.
Well, another one that does it is AITE, right? You go into the atrium there, the whole place is
there's all
ringed
the
with flags
flags.
of the world.
Yep.
So,
and we have two other elementary schools in Stamford,
Right.
So Strawberry Hill and
so it's
Rogers.
a strange thing. So it's at some point, do the kids learn about Swaziland? Do they learn about Namibia? Do they learn about Uganda?
I would think it's in the curriculums, correct?
That's a lot of countries to learn about.
And this gets back to, too, what's happening in our state. So our reading scores are low at third grade. Mm-hmm. So the right to read policy was passed.
Yeah, you got to tell me about that.
And yet that becomes another issue as far as how the selection of programs happened. There were 5 initially,
Yes, right.
and then 2 more added, but nobody knows it's secret who was on that committee and those commercial programs were allowed to be brought in. And then what happens?
Why is it a secret? This is ridiculous.
It's handled through the political side, through the legislators. So you had Billy Miller, who's from Darien, Senator Billy Miller.
I know her.
She was part of that process, and she's not a reading expert, but she could bring in these 7 programs. Now you remember, DEI is, we are technically a racist state.
I know.
So that is built into this program too. Yet you have to do waivers when your test scores are doing great. Trumbull, Greenwich, Darien, New Canaan, their programs are doing great, and they're saying we need a waiver. We'd like to stick with our program. They don't get their waivers passed.
To me, this is the same complaint with Common Core. Okay. And I'm going to tell a quick Common Core story, in spite of the fact that it's infested everything from what you're saying. It was March 2014. It was the reporterette from the Washington Post, and she had a moment with Bill Gates. And she said, Mr. Gates, I know you've been a big advocate for Common Core. You have 3 kids who are middle school age about now. They're going to the school that you went to. That was the Lake District School, right? Yeah. We looked on their website. We can't find any mention of Common Core on there at all. And he says, well, if I had my choices. Okay, pause. Stop right there. There's more, but now wait a second. You're the father. You get to decide. What do you mean if you had choices? I think you're being a phony. Okay. Then he said, if I had my choices, they would have a, wait for it, drum roll, dramatic pause, superset. A superset. What does that tell you about Common Core? BS is what it tells you.
Well, it's actually Hillary Clinton's program. You know that. She came
I didn't know that, no.
Yeah, and then she...
Well, I thought it was Coleman, 2006, the paper he wrote.
Okay,
no?
But she was the funder. She was the politician that brought it around through the New York side.
I see.
And then that picked up momentum, and then it grabbed. Mm-hmm. It's very politically driven, and that's the problem. Right. And then when you have people, like Bill Gates, who has money coming out of his ears, and he can send his kids where he wants, and then do as I say, not as I do.
Yes, he admitted that he spent well over $3 billion on Common Core.
Yep.
And for what, And so the problem, of course, now using Connecticut as the example here, because I was following this crap, at the time of adoption, which I believe was approximately 2010, the State Board of Education would put out these minutes of the meeting. So I found the ones where they described when they adopted Common Core. And boy, talk about BS. The argument was that what we have is inadequate compared to Common Core, which is baloney. Connecticut, was it the Thomas More Foundation?
Yeah, see, again, I'd have to dig back.
There's this group that always puts out the report cards on the state's educational systems. And so Connecticut was rated a B or a B plus, okay? So the notion that you have something that's better than that is ridiculous. We know that Massachusetts is considered to have the best educational standards in the country. And even they say, oh, gee, Common Core is better. I don't buy it, okay? I don't buy it. Yeah.
Well, then that's why, depending upon who's wearing the hat of the decision-making, you'll find superintendents and Board of Eds falling in line with that. Mm-hmm. So they become minions rather than standing on their own, tried and true experience. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes it really difficult to watch that, because that's when you become a bureaucrat and not a true educator.
Yeah. I mean, it's
really kind of hard to watch that.
Well, and it's common. And the problem is that administrators are growing faster than the national population. There was a piece about how there are 2,800 more administrators at Harvard than there are students. How do you have more administrators than students?
Well, we're dealing with this in Stamford, and that's going to be my next op-ed about administrative bloat.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy. When they want to cut teachers, yet there's $8 million, 8.5, 8.7 going into administrators who really aren't in classrooms anymore.
Yes.
And it's a do it as I say thing.
Yeah.
We have a problem. And so they are basically breaking the foundation in that district.
All right, so what's Hefman's defense for this? What is Hefman's defense for this bloat?
It's autocratic control. She doesn't understand it, for one thing. That's why my last article, Poke the Bear, was about that.
Okay.
And they're not treating these teachers as professionals. Mm-hmm. It's a money issue. Mm-hmm. First of all, they're implementing programs they can't even support financially. They wanted to bring in the block schedule. I'm well versed in it. Mm-hmm. I told them, are you ready to pay for the behind the scenes for all the teachers?
Is this the Pick 6 thing that's being protested?
Right, yeah.
Right, I don't quite understand that.
Well, so before COVID, they were researching block schedules.
Okay.
And so...
Researching block schedules, really?
Right, and they needed to, because the state wanted the students to have more credits. We were failing in math and reading again, at the same level.
So they want to give more credits? How does that solve the problem?
Right, so you just keep beating the dead horse, and we're supposed to get better. So what happens, you add more credits to the schedule area. So they needed to look at schedules, because they didn't think in an 8-period day they could do it. They could easily have done it. Yeah. Nope, so we're going to look at secondary research. That was pointing at block schedules. But with that, you're using research from Al Shanker with the AFT. He went international. Hong Kong, Norway. Why were their scores so much higher? Well, collegially, they had the experts in those fields, those subject areas, were able to dialogue, research, talk about it. How do you move a child from this level to this level? That's what the beauty of a block schedule is. Okay. So Stamford implements this. Of course, there was a lot of drama in the picture, because they did a switch, bait and switch. Let's go to this one. And of course, that's not what the teachers chose. Right. Needless to say, there was enough uproar. They went with the block schedule. Now. And the problem becomes now they want teachers to teach another block because they can't find enough coverage.
That's right. Okay.
The right arm, left arm.
I can't. All right. So that by itself appears to make sense. Still raises a lot of questions for me, but
they don't practice with fidelity. That was my concern.
All right. I'm going to start with a specific example, which makes my larger point in question. There was a complaint that happened in the Eastern Middle School in a chemistry class, because you had some of these administrators trying to come in and take up some of the class time on chemistry to teach DEI.
Right.
I don't think the state allows that. They have an expectation that says you are spending X amount of time for this subject, Y amount of time for this subject, and now they're going to kind of try to
Well,
steal
the
a little bit of it.
administrators were probably tinkering with the schedule, and they
Yeah.
took time out of each subject area. I can't imagine it was just chemistry. But that becomes the problem. You
Yes, it
keep
does.
filling with all these policies because they're supposed to get more teaching in the area of sexism and racism because we're a
Okay.
racist society.
All right, so we're under the impression that the director for the State Department of Education, is that Charlene Russell Tucker? Or
Right.
Tucker Russell?
She's been at the state
Right.
level for a long time.
So if I had to grade her as a Marxist, would she get a 10?
Ooh, I don't want to go there. I think
Okay,
she's been
cough
there for a
once.
long time, so
Okay.
she's seen the ebb and
Changes.
flow.
Yeah, okay. So the question though becomes, it just seems that if you have the same department that is pushing, I'm sorry, these Marxist concepts, and they're trying to shove it into the system,
Right.
okay, you've already got stuff you have to teach. How are you going to teach that and? You can't.
And
But they're
that's-
doing it somehow, so
Right.
what's going on?
Yeah, and that's again where they're jumping into an educator's lane versus staying in their lane, and they feel that they have to tinker with parenting, and that's the bottom line. They think if we're a racist society, they're going to tinker. So they're going to tinker in the schools,
Right.
and where does it come out? I mean, that's an open-ended, it's hard for educators because we're trained specifically to teach content. I was
Yeah.
never trained in all these other things that they're now adding.
Well, if anything now, you have to become sensitized to when this oppressor crap is being thrown at you, and you have to say no. And
Yeah,
no to you,
you got
too
5
back
minutes.
there.
Yeah.
So the other part, though, which we didn't get to, but we kind of touched on, is it starts with our lovely State Attorney General, Mr. Tong.
Of course.
Right?
He's from Stamford.
Yes, as we know, he has quite the history. The issue here is that he said, I'm going to join the 16 other attorney generals from the state who will support the privacy of children who want to be transgender, and we will keep the parents in the dark.
Yeah.
So,
This is just pure political stuff that's
Yes.
being built in there. And of course, many educators, we're selfless. Our job is to teach our kids our subject area
Right.
and help them achieve.
Right.
And it's hard because we're kind of caught in the middle. They'll be good soldiers. That's
Yeah.
what's happening in Greenwich, or depending upon what's happening out there. And
well, I would love to create an underground movement of teachers who hate this crap and, work together to push back against it. Is it possible?
well, I think you have to start with the universities and
Well, I'm just
start
thinking
with
of the Connecticut public education system. I mean, my problem is I see every one of these as a collection of these hotbeds of evil, unfortunately, and I realize that may not be the right way to look at
I
this.
think it's complicated, and it has to be, the conversation has to come in from different angles. But right, it's almost like 1775 all over again, where you have to be
yeah.
revolutionists.
Yes.
I mean, I don't see how
All right,
else,
well,
and you have to shake up the
Yes,
system.
and there are different ways of thinking about shaking up the system. That's another discussion.
I mean-
that's another discussion.
Right.
So-
Where is the breaking point, and when are we going to, start making, and where are we going to start making these changes? I think it's taking individuals like ourselves that
Yeah.
are patriots and saying we
Well,
got to
all I can
keep
say
moving
is
forward.
that's a part of the council's ongoing deliberations. We're already fighting battles on different fronts, and that's never a good thing. I think we're going to stop there, guys. I want to thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
And you're going to be back because, as I said before, you're four square in the middle of this stuff. And actually, I think the thing we should think about was we're going to expand this to a panel discussion.
Sure.
Okay. We'll get the gentleman from Greenwich, where there are some people from Killingly, and a few others, and maybe that'll get the ball rolling for that project. So that's that thought. And on that happy note, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll be back. Thank you.